Hello everybody of the vinyl community, John back again. This is going to be a quick little go at a thread that I saw somebody do. Actually, I saw Rob Walker, as usual, jump on his thread about a week ago, I think now. And it was originally set up by a guy called Stylus Meets Vinyl, a man called Chris. I went and looked at Chris's original video and I thought, well, that's really interesting. So it was all about um, albums that you would, if you were the producer, what you would change about them. And he's given sort of a list of questions. I think there's 8 questions, of which I've sort of found a few records in my collection that I'm going to use to answer these. I hope you find it mildly interesting. It's been quite fun to think about this. Now, the first question and the last question are um, a track that doesn't open an album that should do, and then the last one is um, a track that doesn't end an album that should do. Now, my answers for those are kind of tied together because I've got an album that sort of puts the first track at the back and the last track at the front. So I'm going to tackle those at the end so as not to give any spoilers away. So the next question that I'm going to start with is a track on an album that's not a single. Now, I've said this before, but I'm going to recall it. And I'm going to go straight to this album, the very first album by the Beatles. Please Please Me. And I've always felt quite strongly about the very first track on here. There. I Saw Her Standing There. It's a really good song. And what I like about it is that the moment the song's counted in and the drums really pick up, like Ringo really kicks in really quite sharp and fast there, you get, as somebody that lives in 2022, you get a real sense of how exciting this must have been to people when they were hearing it for the first time, because it really is, it really is full of that charge and energy that I think must have been so unique in those days from sort of rock music, that people just really, when they were experiencing it, it was really sort of adrenaline fueled. Now, interestingly, that song, I Saw Her Standing There, has never been released as a single. And I'm surprised because I think that would have made an amazing single. Um, I guess I'm not surprised in that maybe they just wanted to hold a little bit back and keep some treasure for the album. I don't know. Did people really think about that in those days? Sort of like, when did the album start becoming sort of a statement in itself? I suppose, or maybe it was around about this time. But they could have easily released I Saw Her Standing There as a single, and it would have easily, reached #1 like so many of their other singles did. Anyway, so that's the answer to my answer to that question. There was a question, and this is one of the things that really kind of intrigued me about this. An album with artwork that you would send back to the designer, something that you maybe point out as being not quite right. Now, people that sort of follow my channel will know I've got views about these sort of things, particularly some of the little small details that I pick up in typography. Um, maybe it's just because I work with these things and I spot them, perhaps, I don't know, but I find them slightly irritating as well. I got a couple examples, but this is one that I've used recently. So here's Jimi Hendrix Free Spirit album. This was in not my last video, but the video before, the album that I picked up this summer. And I made a point of pointing out the horrendous typography on the back. Now, because I've shown this, I know that it's not so easy to see. So I'm going to try and look for images online to bring in here and show, and point out why this doesn't really work and where the mistakes are. But one big thing, and it's not just the typography, it's just the rendering of it. I don't know if you can see down here, there are lines here. I mean, so this was made before desktop publishing, but there are like lines here of where the the people that have printed this and pressed it, how you can see how, yeah, it's sort of cut and pasted, and they've made little or no attempt to really kind of um, smarten that up and sort of keep it nice, because you've got the almost like the glue lines of where these were cut out and placed in position. And you can see that. I mean, these days it's so much easier to take it out, but even in those days before desktop publishing, there were ways and means of doing that. And that I hadn't even gotten onto the typography. I mean, for the start, this is fully justified text, and it's just not necessary to use it. They should have had a ragged right. You know, it's all about communicating to the reader, and the reader, um, people like you and I, we're not mechanical and we're not digital. We don't need um, these attempts to kind of make us into mechanical beings and read sort of lines that all match with a nice right edge down the side here. Because what that does is it puts unnecessary spacing between the letters and the words, and rather than read it in a natural kind of way with, you know, the correct spacing between the words, what it does is it makes big chasms of space. Now that messes up the texture of the text, and it just makes it harder for the reader to read it. Now there are some people saying, oh, but it looks neater. I'm not going to argue one way or other. I don't think it does. Uh, but when the justification of having justified text comes down to it makes it look neater and not, oh, it makes it more legible, then there's something wrong, isn't there? Surely the whole point of text, the whole point of, writing something and having it there for people to gain information, that must be the top priority, not making the page look neat. Anyway, so that's one of my moans. I think that answers my question about an album that I would send back and have it re-looked at for the artwork. Right, now the next question was a song that I would make longer. People that follow my channel know that aside from all the rock music I listen to and the progressive rock especially, I also have a soft spot for Duran Duran. Duran Duran were one of my first loves, I think. Um, I think it's fair to say, if I remember rightly, I did a ranking video. I don't do many ranking videos, but I did my favorite albums of the 80s, I think. And I think I must have chosen this one as my number one because, well, it's an album that's meant so much to me. It's what I got into when I was, 14 or something, and it wasn't my first album, but it certainly was a very important album for me, and I always hold that one up as one of my favorites. Now, there's a track on here. There's lots of tracks on here, and there are a few singles that did Rio, My Own Way, Hungry Like the Wolf, Save a Prayer, I think. Anyway, my favourite track on here is a song called New Religion. It's the first track on side 2. It's never released as a single. And something that Duran Duran were always very, very good at, I think, was, and they were quite ahead of their time, I think, being New Romantics, they made excellent sort of extended dance mixes of many of their, well, all of their singles. They sort of called them club mixes or night mixes, that sort of thing. And they were sort of extended dance versions of the songs. And if you like Duran Duran and you like that kind of thing, those singles are really, really good. Now, they didn't release that track, New Religion, as a single. It's an album track. but it's always been one of my favourite songs, and I like its pace. I like its atmosphere that it brings. And there are two versions of that that you can get. I think it's B-sides on different tracks. And one is called, I think one is called the Night Mix, and one is called some other kind of mix. I can't bear now. But surprisingly, they are actually shorter than the album track. I'll put the timings here for you to see. Now, why would you make a dance mix or a night mix that's shorter than the album tracks? I think that I would like to see Duran Duran make a nice extended dance mix or an extended night mix of New Religion, because it's one of my favourite songs, especially by them, and I think it warrants a nice sort of extended longer track, perhaps not for use on the album, but as a single or as a, well, a special release. It doesn't even have to be released as a single, just be an interesting, like, extended player. Okay, so that answers that question. Which song would I have made shorter? Well, I had to and ah about that. Here I think is an album that many people will be familiar with. This is Song Remains the Same by Led Zeppelin. It's their sort of double live album from back in the day, you know, before they sort of made an attempt to start releasing records again and albums again like they do. I mean, even though they're not a band formed, they release every now and again live albums or whatever, concerts. This was sort of like, you know, while they were still together. And there are some great tracks on here, but there are also lots of tracks on here that are really, you know, just grueling, because they just plow on forever and ever and ever. Unless you're really kind of into it, it becomes a bit of a drag. And I must admit, there are tracks on here that do stop me from actually playing the album. The one that I'm thinking about particularly now is Moby Dick. So Moby Dick's down here. It's, you know, like I said, it's a live album. And of course, being back in the sort of the 70s, flared trousers and everything like that, John Bonham uses the track Moby Dick, which is an instrumental. He uses that to do this really long, extended drum solo. I like his drumming. I think it's brilliant. I think, you know, there aren't many drummers that I rate higher than John Bonham. However, you know, I just feel that this particular track on here gets a bit monotonous, because there's a bit where he's going. I'm not going to do drum noises, but it's like the rhythm. And you think, after a while, you just think, oh God, there's more to life than just listening to this, this drum solo. So if I was a producer, I would revisit that track, the live track, and edit it so in such a way that you still get, you know, his expression of, here's my showcase, I'm doing some excellent drumming here, but I would take out the bits where it starts to get a bit ridiculous, and perhaps even make it into a more interesting track, and it certainly would make it into a more interesting album. So there's my answer to that question. an album that I would make, a double album that I would make into a single album. Now, Chris, you didn't say that we had to stick to studio albums for this, so I'm going to pull out another live album. And the live album I'm going to pull out to this is this. Actually, I do quite like this album as it is. It's a really good album, but I think it would be an interesting experiment. I've spoken about this before as well. You see how the lettering on the front of this record, Humble Pie performance, Rockin' the Fillmore, it's sort of produced like a rubber stamp type rendering of the lettering there. Now, the album that originally started that sort of idea was, I think, um, the Rolling Stones, one of their live albums. I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was, but I think it was. Um, that was that went on to inspire the way that the Who live at Leeds presented their live album in a similar kind of way. And also that also inspired, the record that they went to make. Very, very sort of hard, really sort of heavy, really live. There's no question it is live and raw and in your face. That's what they wanted to do. And what they did with Live at Leeds is that they trimmed it down. I mean, there was a lot of music recorded, and that has since been released on, I think, deluxe editions of Live at Leeds. But for the Live at Leeds album that they released, just a single live album, they wanted it short, sharp, and really in your face. So they cut it down. There's just a few tracks on there, but there's no fat on Live at Leeds. Put it that way. And for the longest time, until the whole album was released, I think on CD, that was what people knew Live at Leeds to be. I think it would be interesting to do a similar thing with this. So I would cut out some tracks on here that are not necessarily bad, but tracks that I would cut out are the ones that would leave the really sort of in your face, drilling, hard face, sort of rocking numbers in here. Like for instance, 4-Day Creep, I would keep there. I'm Ready, I would keep there. The last track, I Don't Need No Doctor, I mean, it's quite a famous sort of hard and heavy track. That was even copied by Wasp at one time, wasn't it? Yeah, so I would cut this down. I'm not going to do this off the top of my head. I'll do this, and I will list the tracks on here, a description of how I would put this album onto one album, and why it would be, a better album, comparable with the Who's Live at Leeds. Well, I hope that wasn't a bit too mumbly. I know what I mean. You just got to follow. An album I would retitle. This is one that I've often chuckled at. So this is an album by Landscape. It's sort of one of those early 80s synthesizer type, very sort of early synthesizer commercial sounding music. And so the title of the album is From the Tea Rooms of Mars to the Hellholes of Uranus. And I mean, it's pushing the envelope out a bit, I think. I've always thought that was a little bit over the top. I don't know if it was a selling point. I mean, do people buy it because it had that ridiculous name? I don't know. But I would probably change that because it's a little bit, a bit rude, a bit close to the edge, I think. So I would just cut it here, From the Tea Rooms of Mars, and leave it at that. I don't think you need this to the hellholes of Uranus on the back. It doesn't need to be part of the title. So that's my answer to that question. Now, the first question and the last one. The first question was an album track that doesn't open an album that should. And the last was one that ends an album, one that doesn't end an album that should. So what I've done is I've thought about this, and I took this album, David Bowie, Yeah, Scary Monsters, brilliant album. I like it, and it's this really my answer really is just for this. I don't really feel this way, but the first track, It's No Game. It's very sort of tough and raucous. It's got Robert Fripp on guitar, and he certainly makes his presence known on that track. And it's great, but the track finishes where David Bowie shouts, "Shut up, shut up, shut up!" Shut up! Now, the very last track on this album is It's No Game Part 2. And that is, slightly differently, produced and rendered. It's more of a together track. There's less angst and anxiety in it. There's the temper's cooled. I think really that was sort of why they did it that way. But I've always felt it would be more interesting to turn it around so that you've got It's No Game number 1 at the end, with the shout of "shut up" at the end and the tape spooling, and the more mellow It's No Game Part 2 at the front. I just think that that might be an interesting way to do this. Maybe it would change the feel of the album completely. I don't know if it would be for the better or not. I don't know. So there's that answer for those two questions. Okay, Chris, I hope that was mildly interesting. I've always quite enjoyed these type of things. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Okay, well, I'll just say thanks for watching. Check out my next video. Have a good day. Bye.